Hello BookTube, I'm Jonathan, and I'm a people person. Or at least I used to be until I read these 4 sci-fi books. While they each have a different style and range in subgenres from dystopias to techno-thrillers, they all question whether humans are headed in the right direction. So let's get into them, starting with Sphere by Michael Crichton. Sphere is a psychological thriller about a group of scientists on a mission to explore a mysterious vessel found at the bottom of the South Pacific Ocean. Now this book hooked me in right from the opening scene with its snappy dialogue, visual descriptions, and its intriguing premise. I can see why a lot of Crichton's works have been adapted because his books do have a cinematic quality to them, and yes, this book is a little bit tropey, but I can't judge Crichton too much for that, seeing as Crichton actually helped popularize a lot of those tropes. For me, the success of Sphere is largely due to Crichton's ability to lure you in with the mystery, give you some of the answers that you're looking for, but then constantly provide you with more problems to solve. For me, this book never really dragged and had me constantly burning through the pages. It also does a good job of balancing the plot development along with explaining the science. Each of the crew members do have a different area of expertise, and that enables them to contribute to the mission in different ways, while also informing their perspectives and the crew dynamics. The book, however, does run into a bit of an issue with the characters, and this is somewhat typical for Crichton. For example, Jurassic Park is a book about a group of characters trying to survive in a dinosaur park, and I was actively Team Dinosaur. Sphere is a book about a group of characters trying to survive underwater, and I gotta tell ya, I was Team Water. Almost everyone on this mission was arrogant and selfish and argumentative, and what was funny was this group was specifically put together based on how they were expected to perform in a high-pressure situation as a group. And it just made me think, if there ever is a mission with potentially enormous stakes for humanity, and we put together a team that is supposedly the best of the best, I'll be honest, I'm pretty 50-50 on whether they save the day or they rip each other apart before they even get there. So while this did make it a little tough for me to relate to or care about the characters, I think it did work thematically in terms of how we might actually handle this situation. I think we might be limited less by our intelligence or technology, but rather other aspects of human nature. I was a little mixed on the ending, but I think by that point Crichton had squeezed enough juice out of the premise that the lack of a mind-blowing finale didn't overly affect my enjoyment of the book. For me, Sphere was an 8 out of 10. Up next, The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. The Handmaid's Tale is a dystopian story set after the events of a second civil war, and is told from the perspective of Offred, a handmaid that is bound to produce children for the commander. Atwood meticulously creates this dystopian future, however Offred's access to information is limited, so the reality of this future world is pieced together through context clues. Offred also shares memories of life before the events of this war, so we get to contrast the differences in her day-to-day experiences. In this world, with declining birth rates threatening the future of the human race, a fertile woman becomes of extreme value. However, rather than becoming someone to be appreciated and respected, they become something to be fought over and controlled. I found the book to be rather character-focused, as the narrative is driven by Offred's interactions and reflections. The book incorporates themes to do with war and religion and government, and it does this by exploring how they affect individuals and relationships, which I found to be an effective approach because it came across as less didactic and more personal. There is this high concept setting, but Atwood takes the time to explore the minutiae of how we present ourselves, how we manipulate others, how we justify things to ourselves, and how we manage to survive. Atwood has a powerful and uncompromising writing style. The narrative never lets you get comfortable. It is depressing, but I didn't feel like it was just dark for darkness' sake. I think there are some unique and valuable insights to be gleaned from this book, so it was confronting, but I think rewarding. For me, the plot development in the first half of the book was a little slow, but in the second half, I think it built to something impactful, and I remember feeling my heart rate actually rising while reading the final few pages of the book. This wasn't one of the most fun reads of the year, but this was one of my favorite reads of the year. I gave Handmaid's Tale a 9 out of 10. And just before we move on to our next 2 books, at the end of the video I'll be spinning the quantum wheel in order to find out the patron pick of the month. So stick around for that, and check out the links in the description if you're interested in joining us on Discord or Patreon. Moving on, we have Time Out of Joint by Philip K. Dick. Time Out of Joint is a surreal story about a seemingly ordinary man, Regal Gum, who makes his living by entering a newspaper contest every day and winning every time. The world initially feels normal, but Regal starts to become suspicious of everyone and everything around him. It has a sense of paranoia that pervades a lot of PKD's works. However, as things start to get more and more strange, I felt like it was just lacking something that I feel was present in some of my favorite PKD works. For example, in Ubik, Dick is constantly presenting you with these helpful clues, or perhaps red herrings, as you try to make sense of what is real or not. The story in Time Out of Joint is creative, but it didn't resonate with me as strongly because it felt like a lot of the events lacked either explanations or consequences. I also didn't particularly care what happened to any of the characters, as they were all rather unpleasant, particularly the ways in which they talk to women. PKD often writes about unlikable or grimy characters, but there's usually at least a little bit of humor there, or some level of empathy. But in this case, I just couldn't connect to any of the characters at all. And I don't mind ideas-driven stories where the characters aren't the focus, but in that case, the ideas have to be pretty strong in order to carry the book. And in this book, we do get some pretty great reveals towards the end, as well as some interesting commentary on the subject of manipulation. However, these are presented through exposition rather than the plot developing in intriguing or unexpected ways. I think fans of PKD will find stylistic elements to enjoy in this book. But for me, I just don't think the execution was quite as strong or as satisfying as it is in some of his later works. I've read 8 of his books now, and for me, this one would be towards the bottom of that list, although I did still somewhat enjoy it. I gave Time Out of Joint a 6.5 out of 10. And lastly, Ice by Anna Kavan. Ice feels like a fairy tale / nightmare in which we follow a nameless man in a future world that is slowly being consumed by ice. In it, he goes on an obsessive journey in order to find a woman with silver hair. The book does a great job of placing you inside the head of this narrator, and it's a creepy and confusing place to be. He has a distinct perspective on the world, and that informs and justifies his actions, but it's rather unnerving for the reader. The story seems simple at first, but the lines between dreams, reality, and hallucinations quickly become blurred. It's not a long book, but it's one that I had to read slowly because if you're not fully paying attention, you can miss these shifts and easily find yourself lost within this nightmare. At first, I loved this experience, and I felt like it was touching on some important themes. The main character feels entitled to this woman because he loves her, but what he's experiencing isn't love, it's a compulsion. It's not a desire to nurture, but rather one to possess and to control. And unfortunately, this plays out in violent ways. However, I did struggle a little bit with the repetitiveness of the novel. The same beat plays out about 5 times, and while I understand that this isn't a plot-driven novel, it also felt repetitive thematically. I felt the same way about the world and the characters 50 pages in as I did after having finished the novel. If you're a vibes reader, then you might enjoy this book because it has a distinct atmosphere. It's a different style of story, but I would put it in the same category as Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation in that regard. Personally, I don't mind short dream sequences as I think they can be visually interesting and reveal hidden truths. However, I do struggle with extended dream sequences. Something I enjoy about fiction is when an author is able to make me feel like this world is real. And when I know what's happening isn't really happening, then it just feels like one step too far removed for me to be able to fully connect with it. In her personal life, the author Anna Kavan struggled with addiction, and while this isn't explicitly referred to, I think you could find ties to it in the novel, as the dynamic between the main character, the environment, and the woman are all connected by feelings of addiction, inevitability, and helplessness. In the end, I found this to be a unique reading experience, and while I didn't love the entire book, I did respect how ambitious it was. For me, Ice was a 7 out of 10. So those were 4 sci-fi books I read in November that made me question humanity. Now let's find out what I'll be reading in the month of November as we head over to the Quantum Wheel. Welcome to the Quantum Wheel, where all of the patron picks are both simultaneously picked and not picked until we observe a winner. Let's find out what I'll be reading in the month of November. Will it be something that restores my faith in humanity? Or will it be another dark, depressing, dystopian type novel? Looks like it's gonna be The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin. Okay, so this one has been on my TBR for a while. I read The Left Hand of Darkness a little while back, and this one sounds interesting. I believe it has a bit of a Philip K. Dick influence, so that's going to be interesting to see how Le Guin incorporates that into her writing style. So let me know in the comments if you've read this one, and if you haven't, consider joining me and reading it in the month of November. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you're a people person, hit that subscribe button. And if you're a sci-fi person, consider checking out the perks of becoming a Patreon member, where you can become one of my robots, androids, or cyborgs, like Nima and New Eden, Half Ogre, Zakoway, and the Compassionate Colin. And you can find more sci-fi content over here.